Good morning. If you want to open your Bibles up to Psalm 101, that's where we're going to start this morning. What quality is displayed when you hold to something that you know is the right thing to do? I took my kids and a few of their friends to a park on a Sunday afternoon. And we were running around playing kickball and having a good time, but the temperatures just kept steadily rising, and after a while we were getting pretty hot. And so we decided to call it quits. And on the way back home, we stopped at the grocery store, and I told them that we could go and get something, and we went to the back where the freezer section was, and I thought they were going to start climbing into those freezers to cool off. But I told them they could pick out a couple of boxes of popsicles. And after some negotiating and concessions were made, they decided what they wanted. And just looking at them, I could tell they were hot, they were thirsty, and so I said, you can go ahead and open the popsicles, and then we'll pay for them when we get to the front of the store. But you can eat them right now. And with that word, my kids tore into theirs. They had the packages open, they were enjoying their treat, but the friends that were with us, they hesitated. So much so that one of them just asked me, he said, don't we have to pay for these first? And I reassured him that we were going to pay for them once we got to the front of the store. But they felt uncomfortable going ahead and eating something that had not already been paid for. What is that called when you hold to something that you know is the right thing to do? We call that integrity. Integrity is the idea of having strong moral values and convictions that we hold on to regardless of the circumstances that we may find ourselves in. It means doing the right thing, refusing to change, even if there's some type of pressure that's come against us. Our theme for this year at Broadmoor, 2023, is Aim Higher. We've been talking about the Christian walk and different ways that we can grow and progress in our faith, in our relationship with God. And this morning, I'd like for us to think about aiming higher in integrity, this character trait that is so vital and important to the Christian walk. Let's begin in Psalm 101 and read the words of King David. Psalm 101, beginning in verse 1. It says, I will sing of steadfast love and justice to you, O Lord. I will make music. I will ponder the way that is blameless. Oh, when will you come to me? I will walk with integrity of heart within my house. I will not set before my eyes anything that is worthless. I hate the work of those who fall away. It shall not cling to me. A perverse heart shall be far from me. I will know nothing of evil. That word integrity is found about 24 times in the Bible, in the ESV translation. And only once is used in the New Testament. In Titus chapter 2 and verse 7, Paul is telling the young preacher to use integrity in his words, to be sound, to be whole in the things that he says. But here in Psalm 101, we find that word used in the ESV translation And there's another word that David uses in verse 2 when he says that I will be blameless. I will walk before you in a perfect or blameless way. David says, I will behave wisely. I will think about, I'll ponder the ways of my life. I'll be careful. David is thinking about his actions. He's considering his ways. And the first thing we see about integrity is that it starts with considering our life, our actions, our conduct, the way that we are living our lives. When I was about 10 years old, my parents had just bought a brand new house, and it had these cream white carpets all through the downstairs. And Mom was determined that we were going to keep those clean. So she had a strict rule about no shoes inside the house. Well, there was one afternoon we were playing outside, and it had started to rain, and the rain had turned the dirt into mud. And I had forgotten something up in my room and came flying back in the house to get it. And by the time I reached the kitchen, I realized that I still had my shoes on. And as I looked back, I could see those mud prints all across that white carpet. I had gone running in without thinking about what I was doing first. Integrity starts with considering, how are we walking in this life? What are my actions? How are those impacting my own life and the lives of those around me? David says, I will walk in my house with integrity of heart. He also says that he talks about this idea of being in his house. To walk with integrity in his house at the end of verse 2. And we see that integrity must be present in our homes. Integrity's got to be not just something that we do in business dealings or when we're negotiating with a neighbor or somebody on a business or selling something, but it's got to be something that exists even within our own homes. As one writer said, home is the hardest place to walk perfectly. It seems easier to walk in perfection among strangers than one's own house. Another writer said, what we are at home, that we are indeed. David understood that part of being a blameless and godly man meant that he had to be living those ideals inside the walls of his own home. We also see from this text that integrity starts and begins in the heart. In verse 3, David said, I will set nothing wicked before my eyes. David understood that in order to walk in integrity, he needed to guard his thoughts, the intents of his heart. He knew that what the eyes see can quickly influence what the mind thinks and ultimately what the heart feels. And so he says in verse 3 that he won't look at anything that would cause him harm. There are different translations for verse 3. The New King James says that he would set nothing wicked before him. The NIV uses the word vile. But I like the way that this is translated in the ESV and the New American Standard when it says that I will set no worthless thing before me. He uses the word, they use the word worthless. It has no worth, no value, no significance. It's not going to provide any type of lasting joy or fulfillment. It is without worth. It's worth nothing. And David realized that there was no good in pursuing those types of things, that his character had to be pure from within, that integrity started in his heart. And then look at the second half of verse 3. He says, I hate the work of those who fall away. David knew that integrity affects our relationships. Because of his commitment to God, David was unwilling to approve or to be a part of those who were engaging in evil. And he uses strong language here. And that's because he understood the danger that this posed. He wanted to distance himself from those who might be a bad influence on him. In Proverbs 13 and verse 20, it says, whoever walks with the wise becomes wise, but the companion of fools will suffer harm. Here we see that it's not just avoiding people who have a bad influence, but also surrounding ourselves with those who are wise, those who can have a positive impact on us. Who do we spend our time with? Who do we surround ourselves with? Do you have any friends that are older than you? And by older, I don't mean that they're born in March and you're born in October, but someone who is 5, 10, maybe 20 years ahead of where you're at in your life. Somebody who's walked where you've walked. They've been through those same challenges. They've had those experiences. They can look back and provide perspective, input, guidance, counsel. The writer in Proverbs says that those who walk with the wise will themselves become wise. And integrity means that we are choosing our relationships. We're intentional about the people that we spend our time with. Well, we're going to look at 4 examples of integrity, 2 from the Old Testament, 2 from the New, for the rest of our time this morning. And notice some of the traits and the characteristics that we find from their lives. The first one is from the life of Job. Job was a man who displayed an incredible amount of integrity. Job was blessed immeasurably by the Lord. He had great wealth and possessions. He had flocks and herds. The Bible tells us that he had 7 sons and 3 daughters, that he was one of the greatest men in all of the East, one of the greatest people of all the East. And God had blessed him richly in so many ways. But what made Job special, what made him stand out, is what's said about him in Job chapter 1 and verse 1. It says, there was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job, and that man was blameless and upright, one who feared God and turned away from evil. Job was a man of integrity, walking in God's ways. He was not to be blamed. There was no charges that people could bring against him because of some type of hidden sin that he had or some type of deceitful practice that he was engaged in. He was walking in God's ways. But we see that character displayed most clearly when Job was faced with a great trial. And in this, we see that Job displayed consistency. His integrity manifested itself in that Job was consistent. Satan had taken notice of him. And Satan came before God and made the accusation that the only reason that Job would serve the Lord is because of all the blessings that he had, all that God had given to him. But he says, if you take those things away, then he's not going to serve you. He's going to curse you to your face. And so with God's permission, Job lost everything: his livestock, his possessions, his family, his health. But in the midst of that terrible tragedy, Job falls to the ground and begins to worship God. And it says in Job chapter 1 and verse 21, Job says, "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I shall return. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. In all this, Job did not sin or charge God with wrong." What we see in the life of Job is this consistency. When things were going well for him, when business was great, when profits were up, Job served the Lord. But when all of that came crashing down, when it was taken from him, and he found himself down in the depths of despair, Job still served God. Consistency means that our actions and our behavior is not dependent upon the circumstances that we find ourselves in. The way that we react and respond to the world around us is based upon something that is much deeper than what's happening today or what's going on tomorrow. When my kids were little, they used to come up and they would give me a hug around my leg. And then they would hold on to my leg as tightly as they could. And I would sort of shake it a little bit and they'd still be holding on. And then I'd lift my foot up and they'd still be clutching to my pants. And then I would begin to walk across the room and still they were holding on as tight as they could. They weren't going to let go. They had made the choice, the decision that no matter what Dad was doing, they were going to be right there. Consistency means that we make the decision beforehand. That we decide in our hearts that when things change, not if, but when they change, we're going to be the same people. We're going to have the same conviction, the same faith, the same determination that we had prior, that we're going to continue to serve the Lord. In the midst of great trouble, Job held to his integrity. We also see this quality displayed in a lesser-known Bible character, a man by the name of Uriah. In 2 Samuel chapter 23, we're given a list of some of the commanders in David's army, the mighty men. This were a group of elite fighters. And 2 Samuel 23 talks about some of the amazing things that they were able to do in fighting and serving with King David. But at the very end of that list, there is a man that's mentioned by the name of Uriah the Hittite. Now, we may not have known anything else about Uriah, but his paths crossed with the royal family when David went up onto the roof one night and saw Uriah's wife, Bathsheba, bathing close to the palace. And after sending for her and inviting her to spend the night at the palace, she became pregnant. And realizing this was a problem, David tries to cover this whole thing up. He goes about a series of plans and schemes so that no one will find out about this. And he invites Uriah to come back from the battlefield. Uriah had been out serving with Joab and the army, and he comes back to Jerusalem. And David tells him to take some rest, to go back to his house, to spend some time with his wife. But notice what Uriah tells David. In 2 Samuel chapter 11, in verse 10, it says, when they told David Uriah did not go down to his house, David said to Uriah, have you not come from a journey? Why did you not go down to your house? Uriah said to David, the ark and Israel and Judah dwell in booths, and my lord Joab and the servants of my lord are camping in the open field. Shall I then go to my house to eat and drink and lie with my wife? As you live and as your soul lives, I will not do this thing. Uriah's integrity was displayed in his honor. He is not willing to go and spend time with his wife, to be at his house, to enjoy these blessings while the men, his comrades, the other soldiers, are still out in the battlefield. He felt a sense of duty. He had this obligation. He had committed himself. He had taken an oath to serve in God's army. And his principles and his convictions wouldn't allow him to go and to enjoy something that might have been pleasant. He held to his honor. We did this little activity with the kids in Bible class one night. We were talking about patience and waiting, and so at the beginning of class, I gave each of them a piece of chocolate, and I said, if you can eat this right now, but if you wait until the end of class, then I'll give you a second chocolate. And I was kind of egging them on. I said, you go ahead, eat it right now. You can eat it. But if you wait, then you'll be getting something else. And so one of them, he took a little piece of the chocolate, like the corner, and he said, if I just eat this little bit, will I still get some at the end? I was like, he's going to be the attorney in the group. And then another one, I looked over at where he was sitting, and the chocolate was gone. And I said, where is your chocolate? He said, well, I put it in my mouth, but I'm not chewing it. He was going to wait with it on his tongue, I guess. But honor means that we are willing to wait for something that is better. It means having the courage to do what is right and not just what's easy. If you compare Uriah and David in this situation, Uriah is selfless and humble. David is arrogant and deceptive. David has no honor in this situation. He's trying to cover the whole thing up. He's trying to hide it and conceal what's happened. Let me just say, if we find ourselves trying to conceal or hide something from our boss, our spouse, our kids, our brothers and sisters in Christ, that is a red flag that our integrity has been compromised. The opposite of integrity is not just dishonesty, but it is hypocrisy. Acting one way, pretending to be something that we are not. In Isaiah 29 and verse 13, it says, and the Lord said, because this people draw near to me with their mouth and honor me with their lips, while their heart is far from me, and their fear of me is a commandment taught by men. These people were playing the part. They were saying these words, but in reality, their hearts were far from God. We need to draw close to God, to hold to that honor, that integrity, just as this man Uriah did, ultimately cost him his life. In the New Testament, we see integrity in the life of Mary of Bethany. Mary was the sister of Martha, and their brother Lazarus. They all three were close friends with Jesus. They often entertained the Lord. He came and stayed at their house on several occasions. But in Luke chapter 10, we're told about an incident where Jesus came to be a guest in their home. And as the meal was being prepared, Jesus started to teach. And upon hearing the Lord give his message, Mary came and sat down at his feet. She wasn't about to miss the opportunity to be with the greatest teacher who had ever walked the face of the earth. So she comes to sit, to listen, to learn from him. While all this is happening, Martha is busy preparing for the serving. And she gets frustrated when she sees that Mary's not helping out with all the work that needs to be done. needs to be done, she goes and protests before Jesus. Tell my sister to come and help me. And this is the response that Jesus gave to her. He said, Martha, Martha, you are anxious and troubled about many things, but one thing is necessary. Mary has chosen the good portion, which will not be taken away from her. Mary's integrity was displayed with her priorities. She realized that having Jesus into her home and the blessing of hearing him teach was such a tremendous gift. She wasn't going to allow anything to stand in the way of her partaking in that. Jesus says that she chose what was better, what was more preferred, and that was a blessing that was not going to be taken away from her. She had her priorities in line. When we first got married, we went to Colorado. My parents were living up there, and we wanted to go camping in the mountains for a couple of days. And so we packed up all of our stuff, and we got out to the campsite. And when we first arrived, we were so excited. We scouted out the area. We found a little creek that was just down the path. And then I started gathering up some firewood and getting ready to build a great bonfire. And I had packed an axe in my stuff, so I wanted to test that out. So I started chopping on some wood, and then I set the chairs up, and I got the fire pit ready, and I was preparing the food. And finally my wife said, don't we need to set up the tent? And I said, no, we got plenty of time for that, until it started raining. Then I was trying to figure out if it was easier to set the tent up in the rain or book a hotel nearby. But priorities is about making a decision on what is the most important. It's not that these other things can't be done or that they're not something that we could also do, but what needs to come first on the list? What is our priority? What's at the top of the things that we are focused on? For much of the world, the priority is physical things, possessions, making money, acquiring more. In 2019, the state of Tennessee legalized sports betting. And since that time, there has been a ridiculous amount of money that has been wagered on games. Close to $10 billion just in the state of Tennessee alone. That is an industry that makes its revenue. It's based almost entirely on the desire to have more money. So we need to think about, what is our priority? Is it something in this life? Is it acquiring more? Is it gaining more things, elevating our status? Or are we focused on true and spiritual riches? In Proverbs 16 and verse 18, it says, better is a little with righteousness than great revenues with injustice. For Mary, more than anything else, she wanted to be with Jesus. She wanted to listen to his word. She wasn't focused on all the other stuff around them. Not that that wasn't important, but she had placed first priority on being with the Lord. Our final example of integrity comes from the life of Jesus. The greatest example of one who walked blamelessly and upright before God. In Matthew 22, the Pharisees come to Jesus and they're challenging him about whether or not it's okay to pay taxes to the Romans, to pay taxes to Caesar. And they're trying to trap him in his words. If he says that it's okay, then he'd be at odds with the Jewish people because they despise the Romans and having to pay the taxes. But if he says that you shouldn't pay, then he is starting a rebellion. He could be charged with insurrection. So they have the perfect question to pose to him. But to try to relax him and encourage him to speak freely. This is what they say in Matthew 22 and verse 16. They said, "Teacher, we know that you are true and teach the way of God truthfully. And you do not care about anyone's opinion, for you are not swayed by appearances. Tell us then, what do you think? Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not?" They unknowingly profess truth. They say that you're not swayed by anyone's opinions, that you speak God's truth in a faithful way. Jesus displayed integrity in his speech. His words were true, they were sound. The things that he said were from God. He was faithful in delivering those to his hearers. He didn't just say the things that would be nice to hear or that people would want to hear, but rather he spoke what had been given to him by God. It's so important to have integrity in our speech, in the things that we say. If we tell one of our kids, they ask us, "Are you going to be at the game this weekend?" And you say, I'll be there. I'm going to be at your game. But then work starts to get busy, and there's a bunch of things to do around the house. And then one of the friends calls and says, "Hey, I've got something that you might be interested in this weekend." And now all of a sudden we're thinking about going back, changing our answer, coming up with a different reason. That is something that can happen subtly, but over time, those around us will start to know that what we say, whether it can be trusted or not. Jesus said, "Let your yes be yes, and your no, no." That the words that come from our mouth, that if we commit to something or say that we'll do something, that can be trusted. Jesus said that he was going to give his life, and he held to his word even when it was difficult. May God help us to be people of integrity. And looking at the great cloud of witnesses that have gone before us, that have lived lives of service and devotion to God, we can have encouragement and confidence that we too can be faithful to him. We're going to close with a song this morning. And if there's anyone who needs to respond to the Lord's invitation, please use this opportunity as together we stand and sing.